Hi everyone. Today it's with great pleasure and with a huge sense of privilege. I am hosting one of my dearest friends and one of the most highly achieved journalists that I know in the business. Today, Selymar Colón has graciously accepted to talk to us about digital strategy, about narrative formats and innovation in journalism. Sally is currently the executive director of digital for Puerto Rico's leading media organization, GFR Media. And throughout her career, she won many prestigious journalism awards and distinguishments. And I had the pleasure and joy to be her fellow in the Neiman class of 2020. And again, to tell everyone that Selimar is one of the leading journalists in her field, with very excellent insights into how to manage your digital portfolio and how to tailor the formats and the stories according to the needs of your audiences. So without further ado, I'm leaving the floor to my dear friend Sally. And at the end of her presentation, for around 10 minutes, we will have time for a Q&A session. Please feel free to type your questions into chat box if we have any. In other case, if you don't see the chat box, you can always raise your hand at the end and directly address your questions to Sally. So thank you so much, Sally, for being with us today from the shiny and great Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gülsin, for that introduction, for this invitation, for the International Press Institute also to have me here. And thank you to all of you that are joining us live. And like Gülsin said, we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. And Gülsin, again, thank you for that humbling introduction. It's my honor to be here with all of you. So as we go, let me share my screen so we can go ahead and start talking about this topic that it's always, I feel, I've like Gülsin mentioned, I've been working on this as a journalist and trying to figure out, I think that's the best way to describe what I'm doing, what we're all doing, trying to figure out what are those best formats or ways of bringing our stories, our journalism to audiences, to old, current, new audiences that we all want to reach, because at the end of the day, we want our stories to have as much impact as possible, right? So it's this is a story I'm telling, where should I tell it and how, right? I think those are kind of the big things. And I hope throughout my presentation today and at the end, you leave this talk with some ideas for you, for your stories, for your newsrooms, for other colleagues as well. So that's basically what we're going to talk about, the formats, how to choose the best one for your story and for your audience. Just a little bit of what Gülsin just also mentioned of my, who I am and my experience. I'm currently in Puerto Rico as executive director for digital. Before that, I was an Iman Fellow where I met Gülsin. And before that, I was at Univision, which is the leading Spanish language television network in the United States. And there I started as an intern, and I worked my way in different positions on the television side and then on digital. And my last job there was as editor-in-chief and VP for the digital team, where I was able to learn a lot from incredible colleagues and able to also do great projects, just like we're doing right now also in Puerto Rico, where we're able to tell stories that have an impact on the communities here at the local and also national level. I always love to show these pictures because this was when I was at Univision. Since I started as an intern and then as a producer, I always say, even though I might be now a newsroom executive, I'm once a producer, always a producer. So that experience in my career taught me to solve problems and to figure them out and try to figure them out as quickly as possible, because we were doing live things that were happening on the go. This was, this was maybe midway when we had social media. Now with social media, doing any coverage live from your phone is just something that we kind of take for granted, right? So I love also to use these GIFs because the cat, I feel it's kind of what us as journalists look like in the middle of a deadline, in the middle of a breaking news. We're running, trying to write, to tell our story, to get all of our facts correct, and the story edited and published and distributed on social media. And then all of a sudden, an editor or a colleague comes to you and says, so isn't it better if we tell that story in another format? Or if you have a video, or if you have an Instagram story or an Instagram post or a TikTok or a graphic, and we're all like, what? No, like the dog, a bit like, but how am I really going to do that? What's the best way? I don't have the time. What are the tools, etc. So that's a bit of what we all deal with at the same every day. Why is this important? Why is it that we have to really, stop for one moment and think about what are the best ways to share our story with audiences? It's because it's changing. And this graphic, which is from the Reuters Institute Digital Report that comes out every summer, this one is from 2023. And I'm sure next year this is going to look very different because of what we're seeing right now, at least in Puerto Rico and in some media outlets in the Americas as well. We're seeing already a huge impact on Facebook's changes in the Facebook page experience and in algorithms, and the changing what audiences see when it comes to news content. We will be seeing the same soon rather than later. Just last night, a colleague of mine from a news organization in the United States told me that they're already seeing the impact on Google's AI and SEO. So search engine optimization is also going to change dramatically on how audiences reach and get our content. So that's why it's really important to understand where are the audiences coming from? Where are they getting the news from? This is a bit of that also from the Reuters Institute Digital Report from Europe, North America, Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and the different platforms where audiences, when it comes to social media, where are they getting their news from? We still see a big percentage that goes to Facebook. I'm sure that's going to change dramatically next year as well. But we see TikTok. TikTok wasn't there 2-3 years ago. Instagram, they have seen a growth. We know it's also a meta platform. But the important thing about this is not just that it's Facebook, it's WhatsApp, it's Instagram. It's that the way that because we are audience too, that we interact with these platforms and what we expect to see there, it's different everywhere. On TikTok, you know that you're going to go and you're going to see fast-paced videos. If you go to Instagram, you might expect on the feed posts that might be gallery that you scroll to the side. If it's on story, you might want to see snapshots that you can change quickly, and so forth and so on, right? On WhatsApp, you might just want to see a message, like if you were talking to a friend, that takes you to a link. So those are things that are very, very important that we take into consideration when we are distributing and when we're thinking how to share our stories. And this is another example. For example, if we take just video, and I just have a snippet here, but there's truly what people say, there's 1,000 ways to tell a story. So in video, it's the same thing. Video, we have many ways. We can do a live, we can do explainers, we can do video animation, you can do documentaries, mini documentaries, you can do vertical video, time lapses. Time lapses, for example, they tend to be very popular when it comes to showing an event that took place in several hours. Let's say, just to take something simple, a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. You know, you leave a camera there and then you do a time lapse of that, and it tends to be something that cuts people's attention in that sense, a setup of an event and so forth and so on. The before and after also, you can see that at how cities have changed throughout the decades, or it can be used after a natural disaster. You know, how was a location before the natural disaster, how it's seen, how what it looks like now. And then we take that into consideration that afterwards, where are they going to see me? Are they going to see me on my phone? Are they going to see me on an app? Are they going to see me on desktop? And so forth and so on. The workflows. I think, you know, as journalists, we do a lot of what we do that comes with practice. We do it kind of in automatic, right? In autopilot kind of thing. And we are used to, as journalists, having a conversation with an editor or with a colleague or someone with whom you bring the idea to, you discuss it, you have your sources, how should you, you know, kind of work on your story. And then we sit down, we write, or we shoot. If it's video, we record the video, we edit, and we publish. And we're really good at that. And usually I call that, right, that's the production, editing, and publication phase of our workflows and our operations. But there are two areas that are super, super, super important, and we tend to forget about them, or if we don't forget, we don't pay that much attention to them. And it's the pre-production and the distribution of those stories. And when I talked about the pre-production, it's that moment when you sit down with also with your editor or with yourself or with other colleagues around you, because nowadays more and more we need to work as teams across the aisle, and there are a lot of intersections with graphics, with photographers, with video journalists, with the social media experts, where you sit down and you tell them, you share your story and you tell them, this is the story that I want to tell. These are my sources. This is where I'm going to go. And ideas start to come. Everyone starts saying, oh, this would be a great graphic that we can do as an interactive. Can we work on these elements? Can we get this data? The same with video and so forth. And you think about that, you add that to your process at the beginning before going out on the field. I know that for day-to-day operations, it might, you know, we might see like, you know, I'm running to do the story, I have a deadline. It might seem like something that's harder to do, but as we keep on practicing this, particularly on projects that are more long-term, you will see that it's a bit, that it just becomes a natural part of your process as a journalist. Why? Because when you produce, you edit, you publish, then you sit down to distribute and you tell yourself, oh, or someone says, or again, you yourself say, oh, I want to do a TikTok with this, or I want to do an Instagram story, but you didn't shoot anything on vertical video for that purpose. So it's something that you can work on, and it might be a bit harder to adapt the video to it. But if you had thought about it since the beginning, maybe you could have done something completely different that would tell a story on Instagram, and it will work kind of as a teaser for your main story to bring the audience to that. So that's why it's important to, you know, go back to that pre-production and think of how you want to tell that story and where, right? Some other questions that I like to ask myself and the teams, you know, when we work on choosing a format, it's what stories do I want to tell? Who and where is your audience? What resources do you have? And if you want to innovate. And the reason of particularly the resources, it's because I might want to do an animated video, but I might not have that, you know, professional with the expertise in the team or even the budget to hire someone. So what's my other option to add to my story? So that's why I always like to add that, because we all have amazing ideas. The question is usually, do I have the resources to do it? Meaning budget wise and personnel as well, right? When it comes to those formats, this is a beautiful story that the team here in Puerto Rico did. It's really important that when it comes to video in particular, that you have something to show. A lot of the times we might get in our head the concept that this has to be video because it has to be video, but not necessarily. Not every story has to be told in video, because it's not good for video, because you don't have anything necessarily to show. And this one in particular is two brothers that became viral here in Puerto Rico because we have a problem with it's not alligators or crocodiles. I completely forgot the name. I'm sorry. But and they go at night and they hunt them, and they they make sure that it's not an overpopulation of them. So there is something to show. We went with them at night. Of course, it's really dark, but having that experience of being with them on the boat, seeing their process, it's something that that interests the audience, and it adds a lot to your story. Yes, that story was also a text story, but most of the value of the story, it's seeing what they're doing and how they do it. These are some neighbors in the area that they hunt them, that were kind of even cheering for them, because they know it's a problem for their community to have the animals, and the government doesn't have any resources to take care of this, so they have taken it into their hands to do this. So that's why it's really important when we have video, have something to show. If you have a phone nearby, you can scan this QR code that I have on screen right now, and watch the story that's here. This is like the labels I put there. It says it's simple concepts also. It doesn't have to be a complicated story to be able to tell it in video. This one in particular is from the New York Times, and it's a story about the most famous French fries in a restaurant in New York. And it's really, really fun story. And it's a news story at the end of the day, because it follows the potatoes from the moment they get to the restaurant on a truck, and the process in the kitchen, and on all the moment until it gets to a customer's table. And throughout the process is giving you also information about where the potatoes are coming from, how they're done. The guy that's doing the peeling is just like a master at it. He peels, I forgot, it's like a huge number of potatoes in 1 minute or something like that. So it's things like that. What is it that so you have something to show, and it's a simple concept, that you can pair those two, or just another format like that. Another format that it's very interesting, and I've seen it in the last couple of years, that it has taken kind of a boom again, is historical content. They use, and I think this is in part because of social media. At least in Puerto Rico, I see a lot of younger people sharing or asking questions about historical and history and situations that happen here or around the world. So at the newspaper that I worked for in Nuevo Dia and Primera Hora, we have seen that, and we have taken action, because the newspaper has the biggest audiovisual and in particular photographic archive on the island when it comes to, because they are the one of the first and the biggest newspaper. So they have been at every news event, and they have been the paper of record for Puerto Ricans. So we have used that to kind of retell the story of what happened when the moment comes. The ones you see on the left, it was one that we did now in May, Vieques, it's a municipal island on the southeast coast of Puerto Rico. And this past May, it was 20 years that the U.S. Navy, because of protests on the island, left. And there was, we were able to reshare with the audiences that archive of images of how locals took it upon themselves to stand up to the U.S. Navy so they would leave the island. And it became an interactive with the images. We did a podcast and interviewed journalists that were there covering 20 years ago. We also had video about it. We had a spread on the newspaper, the post on Instagram, Reels, and all of that. And it was a project that really caught the attention of a lot of people. Another one that has been very, very popular for us is baseball. It's a huge sport here on the island. And we have many baseball stars. Well, one of them stands out, which is, his name was Roberto Clemente, because his life was cut short. He died in 1972 of a plane crash on New Year's Eve when he was on his way to bring aid to Nicaragua, because in Nicaragua they had gone through a really bad earthquake, and he was bringing aid to them, and his plane crashed off the coast of the island here in Puerto Rico just moments after lifting off. The photographer, the people that you see on the image right now that's running, the one on the green shirt is our editor for audiovisual. The one sitting down, it's the photographer, the newspaper photographer that became Clemente's photographer. He had insights to his life that no one had. And we had those pictures. So we took, it was, no, I forgot, I think it was 30 years. No, 50 years. Oh my God, my math. 50 years of Clemente's two important things that happened in 1972 for Clemente. In September, he did a major record of 3,000 hits, which in baseball it's still a big number to get to. And then it was his tragic death in December of that same year. So we decided to bring out of the archive images that had been seen and some images that had never seen, that people had never seen them. This is the entrance to our photo archive. And the project has been received with open arms from everyone. And I became an exhibition, and his family was extremely happy with it. And especially, it gives us the opportunity as journalists to, again, revisit that history and tell it, for the ones that lived it, to relive it, and to the ones that don't know it, kind of be there again. And the other one is another example. It's kind of, take things that to nowadays, again, we take for granted. I love this example from the Atlantic, which is very simple. Why do we wear pants, right? So it's things that are our day-to-day, sorry, that we might do, that we can go back and kind of figure out other ways to share that. Here, I'm going to start sharing some tools with you that are accessible to you, to your stories as well. Those other formats, some of them were done with developers and some were done with photojournalists. And some, as you see, were just text. But these ones in particular, this is a timeline that it's very easy to use and to add to any story online. It's from the Night Lab. And the Night Lab has a couple of tools that are extremely useful. We use this one a lot because it helps you to show parts of your story in a different way. This one, we're doing a story about El Gran Combo, which is one of the most famous salsa groups in Puerto Rico and around the world. And they were also celebrating 60 years of their group. So we use the timeline. We've used it for investigative stories. As you can see here, entertainment stories. It's a tool that is a Google sheet where you add the information, you add the pictures, and then you just embed that on your website to be able, and it's easy to navigate on desktop, and it's easy to navigate on mobile devices as well. This one, it's a great story also from the Washington Post that uses audio. It's very cool because they did a story with a carpet cleaner who speaks 24 languages. And his story, it's remarkable. And as audience, it was really cool to be able to be reading the story. And all of these areas that you see in colors, it's his voice saying that phrase in the language that they are, in this case, they were talking about Portuguese. So he's saying that phrase in Portuguese, and so forth and so on. This is a development from the Washington Post. I'm sure they did it internally with their team. But to do things like this, the Night Lab also has a tool for audio that you can embed on that phrase. Let's say you're writing a story, and instead of the audience just reading the quote from your source, they can hear your source say it. That adds a lot, I think. That adds a lot to your story, and that adds a lot to the experience of the audience, to not just read it, but to hear from the source itself, from their voice, what they're trying to say. So these are just two of tools that the Night Lab has that are accessible and open to all of us. And like that, I'm sure if any of you that are on the call right now have used any of this or have any other tools that you want to share, I invite you to share on the chat, so we can all save them and share with each other. Like they say in English, sharing is caring too. So feel free to add that to the chat as well, or on the comments when we share this as well. So newsletters, it's also another format, and it might be a lot of us might receive too many of them. We might think. I know I subscribe to many of them. I read them for a bit, and then I might unsubscribe. I just keep some. And Axios in particular, the one on the left, has done and has changed kind of the way we consume, which the Skim, which is the one on the right, also started doing a couple of years ago, or I would say, I think they've been around for almost 10 years already. The Skim, which is that the way they break down the text. It's not just paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of a story. We break it down into what might be most interesting to you, or what's more important about the story, which at the end of the day, it's exactly what we do as journalists. We tell the audience the what, the when, the who, the how, and the why, right? And so forth and so on. So they do the same thing, right? They kind of break it, why it matters, what's happening. So even though we all do that naturally and as part of our storytelling, the idea of breaking it down for the audience makes it very easy to read. And they've seen this is something that a lot of organizations are emulating and are also trying to do themselves, because it adds to the audiences, and it adds to the attention that they have on the stories that they're reading. The interactives that connect the audience, this example in particular from Lupa, it's a nonprofit news organization in Brazil. It was very interesting. They did it with the Google News Initiative and with Alberto Cairo, which is one of the world's top journalists when it comes to infographics and interactives. And what was interesting about this project is, from what I've read, I did not work on this project, and as interacting with it itself, is that they were trying to figure out a way to make the audiences care about what was going on with COVID in Brazil. As you may all know, Bolsonaro, just like Trump did, they were fueling a lot of the false information, and they were naysayers about COVID themselves, and the numbers were piling up, and a lot of people were dying in Brazil because of the pandemic and because of COVID in particular. So with this interactive, what they did is they took the data that was out there of the people that were dying from COVID, and when you put your address in Brazil, it would give you a map of what that data would look like if they were your neighbors. So it brought the data and the information to you. So I think it's really it's a great way of not just telling the story of COVID and the realities of it and the people that were dying, families that were losing loved ones because of COVID, but I'm bringing it to you. So it's kind of the why is it what what's in the story that will make you care more and will bring it to you at that in that scenario. So I think that's what was very interesting about this project and different and very innovative in that sense. Was another use of data. I love this phrase, this quote from Jorge Ramos, the co-anchor of Univision News. He always said that TV doesn't just happen. TV is produced and it's planned. Timing is key. Planned in the way of, you know, that you want to shoot this kind of video and you want to get this interview and you have to be somewhere at a certain time. A lot of what we all do is not just in TV. And I think that's the important part of the pre-production, right? It's how do we plan those stories so we can have as many resources and tools and ways of sharing them. Some other tools that I added here to that I use and my team and my colleagues on a daily basis, it's Google Trends. Google Trends gives you kind of a pulse of what in that world of Google, at least in the Americas also, and I know in other parts of the world. Google, it's the still the #1 search engine. I know TikTok is kind of advancing in that area, and it's being used more and more as a search engine, which wasn't the idea originally, but it's happening. And this gives you, at least throughout the day or on a certain day, a kind of an idea of what our audiences reading, looking for. And just by going on Google Trends, I did the exercise of going into Google Trends, choosing Turkey. This was on Wednesday, and these were the top stories that the audience were reading about. And this gives you a sense, you say, okay, it's the arsenal, or it's the inflation, or it's any other story. That story has been told. So what other story can if the audiences are interested in this topic in particular, what are the other angles that I can work on for them that will be useful and that would have an impact and that will be interesting for them as well. So this is a way of seeing those top stories. This one at the bottom, it's another way, which is on the Google Trends, you can add different words that you can look for in different, in the past 12 months, past 3 months, 6 months, 3 months. And then you can also look even the last 4 hours. I suggest always trying to look past 24 hours. It gives you a better sense of what people are looking for, and an easier way to save kind of that link of Google Trends is just going, kind of using the what, where, why, how, our basic questions, just adding those. And it will give you, in this case, I just, screenshotted this one, which it gives you a map of the country and the areas where these words are being used the most. And it's there, what is ChatGPT? What is my name app? What kind of rice cake? So there are some things that you're like, interesting, but there's nothing I can do with this. And then there are stories that you're like, oh, okay, wait, there might be something here. The audiences are asking about ChatGPT, and I'm sorry I got this cut off. I'll move it when I share it with the team so you can see the percentages. If it's above 400%, 500% of interest on the breakout, it's a story that, or it's a topic at least that you want to, go a bit, dig a bit more. What is it that the audiences and people are interested on and they're looking for? Because there might be something for you to do a story on or to investigate and write about. Answer the Public is another tool that is very interesting that can help you. They have a free version and a paid version. These can help you also find those other angles. When we are, we might be like, okay, for example, let's take, and here I added the inflation, right? So and I added Turkey and give me the results in English for me. In this case, you can add any language that you might want, and it gives you an idea of what are the different questions that the users and audiences are asking about that might be worth taking a look and saying, oh, okay, there might be a story here. It's like, how much is my money worth now? Has this happened before in the country? How did the government and institutions and the citizens dealt with what's going to happen 3-6 months from now? Those are different, angles that might seem very basic, but are also very useful to take a look at them, and you might find something that it's worth investigating, sharing, and writing about as well. Some other tools that I also like and find really, really interesting for editing video on the right. This is Premiere Rush in particular. It's from the Adobe Cloud. There's a lot of tools out there to edit video, but Premiere Rush works on Android and it works on iOS as well. And for me, the phone app, it's very, very, very easy to use. Because it allows you to also, when we're talking earlier about, I doing a video story, but now I want to do it vertical, but I shot on horizontal. This allows you for that kind of process to cut the video and crop the video in vertical in a very easy way that you can follow the image instead of having to readjust which used to be a bit harder before. And you can add text, you can add any other features, and any graphics with that text that I was mentioning, which is something also that I totally recommend doing nowadays, because the audiences, sometimes I say they're again used to listening to videos, but they're more used to reading video. We used to say 5 years ago that we're back to the silent movie time, when audiences were just reading text when it came to video. Substack, if you're thinking of newsletters, Substack is a great platform to think of, to try, to test. It's very, very important, in this process of formats, to keep that continued education and that thirst for what's new, what's out there, because things will continue to change. And I always say that's our only constant nowadays, to find what works for you, what you feel more comfortable with. And Substack allows you to build your own newsletters, to share them. And I believe Substack has also, like Patreon for audio, has the ability for you to receive payment from your subscribers, so have subscribers at the end of the day once you build your audience as well. The Night Lab, like I was mentioning before, they have a lot of tools that are available and open for all of us. I did not add here, and I should have, the Night Center for the Americas at the University of Texas in Austin. Has also great programs in English, in Spanish, and Portuguese, and they have other languages as well. And they have constantly they're adding new classes and seminars there as well. And then of course here through the Institute of Press, these kind of workshops and seminars are very useful to continue that continuous education. Podcast Garage is another great resource if you're looking to do content in audio. NPR has also a lot of tools for you to kind of get started when it comes to audio, even what equipment to get, how to place the microphone, and those useful things. First Draft has some great tools as well when it comes to fact checking. I remember I did I heard a class or a seminar like this with them about verification of content with mobile devices. Really, really interesting, and things that you can put to use while you're listening to them and right after. The News Product Alliance, it's also a group that's fairly new, that also it's trying to combine that intersection of what's happening now in newsrooms and in media and in journalism, where journalists are not just text-based or video-based or photograph-based. Now you have infographers, you have the designers, you have the programmers, and a lot of them are journalists. It's not just the technical aspect; they are journalists because they take all the ethical and sensibilities that are needed to tell a story in a journalistic way and format. And Canva, it's a great tool also if you're thinking of doing any formats or storytelling in social media. Canva also has a tool for editing video. I've heard really good things about it. I haven't used it. I've used it, and our team in Puerto Rico here, we use it for our templates on social media, and it's extremely useful, and it allows it also to be a collaborative tool for you to use with other colleagues and people. Other tools that I also like to share, you can tell this picture is kind of old. I have that kind of old headphones with but why just say, mobile phone, the headphones, and the WhatsApp? Because when it comes to video, sometimes we think we need the big camera or the expensive camera, the expensive editing tools, etc. And sometimes all you need is exactly what you have on your hand, which is your phone and your headphones. Yes, it might be great to have a good microphone and expensive camera that shoots, in 4K. But with your mobile phone, you can do great stories as well. Try to practice before kind of your stability and the shots and that pre-production of what you do. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, there was a journalist that was working with us. I was at Univision by then, and she was here on the island. And she used just her phone and her headphones because she didn't have any more tools at that moment to do a great story about how a funeral home became a lifesaver for locals in this municipality on the west side of the island, because there was no communication. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, there was a total communication, not just electrical blackout, but communication blackout. And so you have an idea, there's about 3.4 million Puerto Ricans on the island and 5 million that live outside of the island. I was one of them, and I wasn't able to talk to anyone, right, for days, some people for weeks. So this funeral home became that life, and she was able to tell that story with her phone and with her headphone, using it as a microphone to get a better audio from them. And then she started sharing small clips of that via WhatsApp to our newsroom, and then we put the story together. There, she didn't edit on her phone back then because, as I mentioned, there was no communication. She was able to get some through this funeral home as well, but she was only able to share small clips for this to work. Other video trainings, as I was doing, I did have the Night Center here. This is one of mobile journalism that the Night Center has. I have QR codes for both of them if you're interested. And also Gülsin and our dear Nieman fellow, Alexander Trowbridge, he has a very interesting video training on the Nieman lab that it's available and accessible to all of us, that I completely recommend to everyone. When it comes to graphics tools, these are two that they both have paid and free versions, Infogram and Flourish. There's a lot of documentation online on how to better use them. On Flourish, you can even do small videos and animations of your graphics. The important thing here is to have the data, know what story do you want to tell with that data, and they then go in here and start experimenting and start testing and trying. What is the best graphic that depicts and it's able to show my data and tell my story. And and it would add up to what you're writing. Or maybe your story, it's just best told on a graphic, and that's completely okay. And I think audiences appreciate that as well, and become more interested in them, because then you can also do these graphics can be interactive, so you can add layers of interactivity to them. So as long as you have your data, you know what story you're telling, and how you want to tell it, then it's just a matter of how much you want to experiment, how much you want to get into it, to test these formats and practice on them. And that's it. That's all I have for today. I know there's like I said before, there's like 1,000 ways to tell a story, and so many more that we could talk about and share. And I hope to also hear from you what other tools you use, if you can share in your chat, or later on social media.
Thank you so much, Sally. It's been very insightful, as one would expect from you. And I have so many questions, but first I will give the floor to the audience. And among the audience, Gökhan Korkmaz raised his hand. And Gökhan Bey, if you prefer to ask your question directly to Sally, please feel free. And if you want to, you can turn on your camera too. You can ask in English or in Turkish, as you wish. Gökhan Bey, mikrofonunuzu açın isterseniz. Sizi duyamıyoruz şu an. Okay. Until we hear from Gökhan Bey, actually Igor had a question for you, Sally, and I will put his question to you. And that's a very, interesting question with many implications. Igor asked, does content shape the form and tools of journalism, or does form shape the journalistic content? In your view, which is more prevalent today? I mean, this is the discussion of the very current discussion, no?
That's a great content. I should have added one more slide that I always like to use, which is journalism hasn't changed. Journalism is still the most important thing. What has changed is how we tell the stories and where we tell them. So that's why the format. So what goes first? Journalism goes first, always. And then you can think about what's the best format. And I think that's the part also that I like to emphasize about that, sitting down and having that conversation with colleagues, in that way, that how journalism has changed also in the way we tell the stories, not just the way, meaning the format, right? It's that before it was just a conversation with one person. Now you might be sitting with 5 people to talk about your story, which is very rare, because we usually work on our own. It's like, you go, you do your story, and you come back with your recording in audio, and you sit down and you start writing. But now that if you wanna take your story to that next level, make sure that you have different journalists with expertise and backgrounds on, at the table with you, so they can help you and, and be that person that when you're sharing their story with them, they're like, oh, wait, for example, in my case, my brain in some way, it's already kind of trained for that. And automatically when someone is telling me their story, my brain goes into like different buckets. It's like, oh, Instagram could be this. Oh, TikTok could be this. Oh, this is a graphic. Wait, do you have more data about that? We can pull that out. And, we start talking about that and figuring out those other formats or ways to add to the story. Even in our newsroom now in El Nuevo Dia, we had the team did a beautiful story. They had amazing portraits. And when I'm looking at the photos, I tell the team, I'm like, what are we doing with this? And they're like, no, we're doing a text and a slideshow. I'm like, no, these images are too much, like we should do like a special where the images can really show and when you're looking at them on a phone or a desktop computer, there's an impact, a visual impact on that story itself also that adds to the work, the journalistic work that they had already done. So that's so always, short answer, journalism first, and then you figure out that format, hopefully before going out on the field to do your story. Sometimes you find the format when you are doing the story. So that's also something to take into account.
Thank you so much, Sally. Yeah, the journalism should always prevail first, but now with the social media, so I completely understand and how minds are all over the place. But as you said, that once we should stick for them, what's the story, and then the other answers follow.
Yeah.
Hava has a question for you. Dear Sally. He asks, do you have any recommendations regarding long form stories? Like you show about the historical content, I guess. Should journalists stick to one single or multi-platforms when covering investigative pieces?
I would always root for multi-platform, because it's a way of kind of being able to tell your story in different ways. When it comes to a digital and long format, it's important to also sit down and make sure you can break that story, because the reason I say this, it's thinking of how audiences consume. So for example, we did a story, and in one of our investigative stories here, about corruption on a bridge construction in 2008. Our investigative team just uncovered, all the pressures that were to give you the bridge cost millions of dollars. It was supposed to last more than 30 years. It's been only 14 years since the bridge opened. A lot of people use it, and it's a very important area for commuters, and it connects kind of the countryside with the city here on the island, and they have to close it again and spend another $30 million to fix it because of corruption 14 years ago, that they kind of speed it up. So when I sit down, and when we sit down with the reporter and the team, we start asking, so tell us the story. He starts sharing what he has, and we're like, okay, so what's your main story? This is okay, perfect. So that's your main story. You're going to have everything in there. But then what pieces of that story can we bring out as separate? Because when audiences are looking for, how much did the bridge cost? How much is it going to cost me as a taxpayer? What were the damages? I also try to put myself on how audiences will interact and look, how I would look at the story as well if I'm looking for it, and how then I can break down that in the story, and it becomes like little stories within the big story. And even when you're doing the interactive, who was it that just published one? I think it was the Boston Globe. I haven't been able to see it, but there are some media organizations that also like to publish when it comes to digital, in chapters. So this will be kind of the idea. So it's like the chapter 1 of your investigation, chapter 2 of your investigation, and that's another way of breaking it down to, instead of making it a long read that you have, I'm doing this, but kind of the scrolling up on the phone, that instead of having to do that for a long time, you can access that story in different chapters.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sally. So Gökhan Bey, he wrote his question in Turkish. I will kind of translate and reframe for you. He said that I'm a young freelance journalist at the very beginning of his career. And what would be, a few examples, 1 or 2 examples that you personally cherish with their innovation in the narrative format? Like, what comes to your mind very immediately about a few recent examples from journalism? And he has this very actually interesting question, like, can storytelling, the word itself, and that it might cause some distrust in journalism, because this is not him writing it, but me elaborating a bit, because as you know, also, like, as a seasoned journalist, like storytelling, sometimes audiences mind immediately go to, oh, what is the difference between fiction and non-fiction? So, and also he also elaborates his question, very shortly, like, can storytelling, the ambition the ambition of storytelling, putting scenes, characters, can it be a risky choice also that would overwhelm the boring, let's say the boring truth?
Okay, let's go. I might ask for you to go back to that last part.
Sure.
I'll go with the storytelling. There have been concerns also when they start calling, you know, or still it's still a name that it's used in the industry, which is content producers, right? What is that? Oh, I'm a journalist. But I think eventually it's that the terms will evolve. And what two things that I, you know, one thing that keeps me up at night, definitely, it's media literacy when it comes to audiences and what's changing around the world, and how we as journalists can do a better job explaining to audiences what we do, how we do it. And then the second part of that will help, it's the transparency. If we are always transparent on how we got the information, and who are the people that we are interviewing, which the way that we tell how we got the information, it's the way we write the story, right? And we make the audience kind of part of that. I'm not hiding anything from you. This is the source I use, and this is the person, and all of that. I think it helps in building that trust. And we will have to see it, right? We will have to see it, how it evolves with artificial intelligence. Just yesterday, I haven't read the story, but I saw a headline from the Nieman Lab about some news organizations that are starting to experiment with artificial intelligence, and they are being transparent about it. But now a study from a university is seeing that even though audiences appreciate the disclosure that it was done with artificial intelligence, it might be doing a dent on trust on those organizations, which not much of a surprise, you know, there, but it's something that we will have to continue to see and see how it evolves. When it comes to formats, I think the first question is formats that I might cherish and I might.
Yeah, very recent examples that you saw and like.
Yeah, recent. Okay, I have to go back to in my brain. But if general formats, for me, they have evolved. You know, video, it's always very, very close to my heart because that's how I started my career. And I appreciate a good story told on video. And that it has all the elements, right? That it deserves. When you watch the story, you understand better the issue. It gets you closer to the issue. It gets you closer to the people that are part of it. Audio, you know, following video, audio has become a big part of me. I don't even tell you my Spotify Wrapped because I heard like apparently 40,000 minutes of audio this year. I know. But I'm constantly listening to podcasts, but especially podcasts that give you an immersive experience. For example, Radio Ambulante, it's a podcast production company. Gülsin, you know them very well as well. They are in Latin America, and they do audio news stories in audio that are extremely immersive. You really feel part that you're there, that you're part of the story, right? And when you start listening to it, you hear kind of steps, and you hear, and it's not that they're making up audio. No, it's actually recorded when they went to do the story, right? That's a very important difference that we have to make when we do audio, in like journalistic stories in audio. It's like I always say, if you're doing like a simple example, you're going into a parliament, to Congress, right? Interview a politician. They know the record. They have to know the recorder is on also before you walk in, but you leave it on, and you're gonna hear the steps as you walk into the place. You open a door, and all of that adds to your story. So anything that's extremely immersive adds a lot to that. And that gets you closer, right, to them. But I'll have to think of specific example of like very, very, very recent particular stories that I've seen that I could share with you, and besides the ones that I just showed you on the presentation that are very interesting. There's another I think they're from Norway. Yeah, VGTV, I think it's the media company. They do really, really cool interactives. I remember a couple of years ago, I always use one of their interactives as an example because it was in one of their newspapers. They kind of they went back to a murder case that had happened 20 years ago in a hotel in Oslo. And they on a 360 video and throughout an animation with pictures, they recreated the room. And then you could, when you were, moving the video, you have kind of blinkers where you could click. And when you clicked, it will show you a picture, a police evidence picture of the scene, right? Like maybe the bullet that was used or the room, but whatever it was, right? That it wasn't too much wasn't sensitive for audiences. So that kind of experience, it takes a lot of work. Let me also add that caveat. But it also adds a lot to the story that you're telling.
Thank you so much, Sally. There's a question. If there are no more questions, maybe we can wrap up after this one. And thank you again. Gizem Coşkuner, you kind of replied to this question about transparency and trust, but I want to put her question to you. She's a trainer in combating disinformation and information disorganization. So her question is mostly about how do you evaluate the future of journalism, which has to constantly verify, by profession, in terms of combating disinformation. And you briefly talk about, Sally, about the trust, how to communicate in full transparency. And since now maybe in the framework of the US presidential elections approaching, what can journalists do more?
It's something that I think about. Like I mentioned, it really keeps me up at night. The media literacy that comes with the misinformation, because I think they go hand in hand, right? And I think there are some interesting projects that are happening, like sorry, I forgot the name of the person that asked the question that's doing this work. In the US, the Pointer Institute just came out with I learned about the project recently. It's been around for a few I think years now. They're doing it with students, and I think that's very clever, because it's not again how journalism is changing, how platforms have changed the way that we consume content. More and more, maybe a couple of years ago, like I said, people were not listening to people, they were reading text. Now they want to see people, right? Maybe 5 years ago, you would ask me and I would be, no, don't put anyone on camera. People don't want to see people on camera. That's television format. That's old school. Now we're back to that. They want to see people on camera, but there's a big difference. They want to see people on camera that talk and look like you. They don't have to be, when it comes to, I always say, with my background, it's on television. There's a thing with television that as soon as you turn on a camera, you become someone else. You talk different. You express instead of just like we're doing, we're just having a conversation, kind of relax about it. And I think that's when the formats come in, right? When we try to combat that misinformation. We think we have to double down on what we do when it comes to elections, because the trolls and the troll farms are gonna triplicate. Now, we saw what happened in Argentina with the election of Milei, and it was because of TikTok, and it was because of two young kind of influencers using TikTok as a platform. Well, it was a lot of things. I shouldn't minimize it to just them, but a big part of it was that on TikTok, there was some personalities that were extremely young, talking and doubling down on content about Milei, and it wasn't enough from the counterparts, right? What they were doing, and there also might be, when it comes to kind of thinking, what can we do different as journalists, is really, we don't hold the key to everything anymore, right? And we need to be humble about that. And we need to also open the door to sit down with these audiences and listen to them and be able to, if there's something that misinformation that's been sharing, kind of give them the tools and the facts right there and then, right? And not wait to see what happens on the wave. So I think the doubling down, There's also another thing that I've been thinking a lot, and I know in Brazil, another Nieman fellow from a class of 2022 was sharing with me recently, is that with Lula da Silva's election also in Brazil, a big part of his win was because I think his name was Filippo, a big influencer that started doing, without having the journalistic training, started doing fact checking on Bolsonaro. So this helped actually to the other side. Instead of helping Bolsonaro get elected, it helped Lula because he was, sharing with his audience all the false information that Bolsonaro was trying to put out there. So I think that's something there as well, right? We might have been alienating too much some of the, I don't know if influencer is the right name to use. I'm also trying to stay away from that word, but let's say content creators that have a lot of following and popularity. How can we, work with them? And maybe sometimes I think maybe it's a matter of sitting down and giving them ethical rules of journalism, because they are already sharing information and that's not going to stop. So how at least do we make sure that they are playing by the ethical journalistic rules and help us combat misinformation?
Yeah, I feel like we should do a whole other panel in the next year with you, Sally, about TikTok personalities, because in Turkey also TikTok is on the rise. And as you said, that I think in the years to come, it will be a very, very challenging issue for journalists, TikTok becoming a search engine. And also, in air quotes, influencers, personalities on TikTok who, how to persuade them to follow some ethical rules when they have already huge audiences, very lucrative sponsorships, and how to, find a middle ground between them and the journalists. Next year's topics, hopefully, and I really hope to host you again. Thank you so much, Sally. It's been incredibly insightful and very useful for journalists in this audience. Thank you so much again. We will share the YouTube video, the recording of the YouTube video. Thank you so much. Would you like to add something? And it's always very, very nice for me on a personal level to see your smiling face. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Gülsin, for hosting me. And thank you for everyone that stayed, to the International Press Institute also, for joining us, for asking the questions. They were incredible questions. And like you said, Gülsin, we can stay for hours talking about this because there's a lot to kind of discuss and figure out. But also, I think it's an interesting time for us as journalists, even though there's a lot of change and things that keeps us on our toes all the time. But it's gonna be it's gonna be very interesting what we all can do and come up with the tools that we have out there.
Definitely. And one last thing about talking for hours. Thanks so much. Very special thanks to our translator Eren Bey and Igor Chelov, who helped us, who organized the whole thing for International Press Institute. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you in the next year with great speakers and interesting topics. Thank you, Sally, again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.